Hey, I want to thank you for being a guest here at calmclass.com. This website is dedicated to one thing, to be able to give you a different mindset. To be able to stay calm in tough times is by changing how you think, because when you change how you think, it changes how you live. My name's Dwight Bain. I'll be your host through most of these lessons, but I'm really glad that you found us. I'm really glad that you're taking time out to watch a lesson that will be life-changing. So do this. Take good notes. Download the study guides. Let these life application principles make your life a better place. And then would you let us know how this is helping you? My thanks to you for watching. My thanks to our incredible team for making it happen. But most of all, my thanks to God, because He gives us principles that will change our life if we use them. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Well, hi. Good to see you today. And I've substituted for Dwight a couple of times, so some of you may know me. And I'm a regular teacher here at the church in the Acts programs on Wednesday nights. So that's my claim to fame at First Baptist Orlando. So glad to be with you here today. I got called on Friday. I think you were supposed to have Jimmy Knott, who's going to be your replacement for Dwight this week, but something must have happened with Jimmy. And Shirley Boss called me on Friday and asked if I could do it. And sure, glad to. Love Dwight. Love to be in his class. He's been a good friend for a lot of years. I love the name of your class, Calm. I haven't seen a class named that before. You know, Christian Attitude and Life Management. So how's it going? You know, managing your attitude and whatever. I heard this pretty lady up here in front say she doesn't listen to the news. That's the first step in life management, you know, for attitude management. I've given you a set of notes. If you all have them, I hope you do, and I'll show you the fill-ins as we go along. But it's entitled Living in the Tension of Reality. A lot of times in our churches and our Bible studies, we tend to speak on and kind of think about the idealism of the Christian life. And I've discovered over the years it's not ideal in any sense. Although it's successful with Christ in it, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, there are a lot of bumps in the road and a lot of difficulties that we have to face. And so there's a tension in life that we all have to deal with. And that's the thing that I want you to see from Ephesians 5 and 6. That's the passage we'll be in this morning, Ephesians 5 and 6. So let me have a word of prayer here for us. Commit our thoughts and our study to the Lord and ask for His guidance as we look at these things. Father, thank you for this period of time in which we can set aside our concerns for the day and that we can concentrate on your word and the instruction you have given us to have a life that is calm. With our attitudes and life adjustments, that, Father, we can walk in the way that you have designed for us. We can be filled with your Spirit. We can know the strengthening work of Christ. And so I pray, Father, that this lesson today will go a ways to help us in understanding all of that, what you have given to us by way of your word. Thank you for the Lord Jesus, our precious Savior, our glorious Lord. Father, I pray that He will loom large in our minds as the one who gives to us all things. So guide us, I pray, and help us to understand these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. In May of this last year, 2013, I did a ministry trip from Orlando to central Wisconsin, so I had to fly to Chicago and pick up a commuter flight up to the Wausau area of Wisconsin, which is the central Wisconsin airport. And took off from Orlando here, and in the 2.5-hour flight, we were about 2 hours into it, getting close to Chicago, and the captain came on the intercom, and he said, we have been put on a holding pattern. There are thunderstorms going through Chicago, and we can't land. So we're going to circle around Indiana somewhere, I forget where it was, but we're going to be in a holding pattern for a time. And I only had about an hour's window between my flight connection to get to Chicago and then get over to the central Wisconsin dock to get up there. And so I was a little nervous that they were going to eat up all that time. Well, in fact, they did. And when we landed in Chicago, I had 5 minutes to get from Concourse C all the way over to Concourse F. If you know Chicago, that's a long ways. And I had a pretty heavy shoulder bag with me, and so I take off. And I've only got 5 minutes to get there, and I thought, well, maybe they'll delay that flight as well. And so I really hurried to get home. I was out of breath. I mean, at my age, I'm concerned about, am I going to die, And so I get over there, and sure enough, they had delayed the flight because the flight coming in for the plane that was going to go out hadn't arrived yet. And so I sort of settled in, and they delayed the flight for 2 hours. Well, after those 2 hours, they decided they would delay the flight a little longer, and for the next 5 hours, there were 4 delays and actually 5 gate changes. So I was going from one place to another for all these changes that are going on. And then at 8 p.m., this was early afternoon when I got there, at 8 p.m., they decided to permanently cancel the flight. Now, I'm speaking the next night. I'm going a day early, fortunately, and I'm to be there and get up to central Wisconsin to the church up in Manitowoc Waters, and so I don't have a lot of time. And so they had canceled it, and there were no other flights out of Chicago that night on any other airline. And so I went to the customer service, stood in a long line, and they weren't able to handle because everything was being canceled that night. Chicago's that way. Whenever there's storms coming through, they just cancel everything. And so everybody's in this line, and this lady's coming along with this little slip. She says, you can call the 800 number and circumvent this line. So I call the 800 number, and they said, well, they can get me up there, but it will take 2 days. The next day, all the flights are already booked. So I'm not going to get up there till the day after I'm supposed to start this Bible conference, this 4-day Bible conference in northern Wisconsin. So, wow, what in the world am I going to do? So I decided I'm going to go over to the rental car places and see if I can't get something, and I'll drive all night. I'll get up there. So I get over to Enterprise, and they've only got 1 car left for a one-way, rental. But they're going to charge me $300 for just the night to have that car. So they inflate the price, and all that. So I didn't know what else to do, so I rented the car. And I drove, over to Rockford and on up through Wisconsin, all the way up to northern Wisconsin. Got in about 2 a.m. And the next day I had to get the car back over to the rental car place at the airport and rent a new car to go up to central Wisconsin. When I had gotten the car at Enterprise, it was late. It was about 9 o'clock at night. And the lady that came out, there were no lights in the parking lot. She had a flashlight, and so we're inspecting the car with a flashlight. Well, I get up there, and we go out, and he looks under the bumper, and he sees scrapes underneath the front. And he's going to charge me for that because they said, well, you must have done it. Well, no way did I do that. I drove the car on the roads all the way, never did anything that would scrape the bumper. And so I received a thing for damage later on in the mail, and I had to go through a whole thing explaining to them it wasn't mine. You ever have a day like that?
Wow.
I mean, now don't feel sorry for me. I mean, folks, that's life. Sometimes you just hit the buzzsaw and it just goes crazy on you. And that's just the way it is. Whenever I find myself thinking about what hell must be like, I'm reminded of Concourse F at O'Hare Airport during a storm. Thousands of people crammed into a limited space, most of whom don't know one another. Everyone in a hurry and agitated about something. No one really wants to be there, and everyone's really trying hard to get out. And so that's what it reminds me of at Concourse F. But how do you handle all of that? Life goes smooth sometimes, and it's just, it's okay. But when it goes crazy, how do you handle that? If you're going to have life management and be calm, and your attitude management, in the airport that night, people were really mad. It's a long time since I've seen a lot of people that mad. There was yelling going on, and I'm thinking, I don't want to be part of all that. The Lord tells me He'll watch over me. He knows I need to get up there. And by the way, God provided. I got to Chicago safely. I got the only 1 car they had left at Enterprise to drive up there. I I made it there at 2:30 a.m. in the morning, good sleep. I made it to the meeting that next night, and my bag didn't arrive, of course. So I got that 2 days later, and it did arrive, and so, well, all's right, and here I am telling you a story, but life just goes like that. And you have to realize, there is a better way. God has given us a way to handle the tensions of life. And there are a lot of tensions in life. You need to know Christ as your personal Savior and then live in the reality of His presence. And when you do, you can kind of back off, be calm in an agitated circumstance, and you can say, Lord, thank you that you're in this with me. I'm going to trust you for how it's going to go, whatever it puts on me, whatever, taxing, lack of sleep or having to drive so many miles in the middle of the night. I'm just going to trust you for your strength, and you just help me through all of this. And He did. Amen. And I was so glad that I had that reliance on the Lord. And I didn't have to get angry, and I didn't have to yell. Well, that's living in the tension of reality. Now, when you come to Ephesians 5, he tells us how to do that in the context of real tension. Okay? So you have Ephesians 5 open before you? Mm-hmm. Ephesians 5 begins in the first 2 verses in the setup for how he's going to help us live in the tension of reality. And let me read those 2 verses for you. It says, Be therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ has loved us and has given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. So be followers of God as dear children. The ESV says, therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children. The NIV says, be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children. And it's all about how he's going to help us with the living arrangements of life. Later on, he's going to talk about personal areas. He's going to talk about marriage in the greatest extensive passage on marriage in the Bible. In chapter 5, he's going to talk about family. In chapter 6, he's going to talk about the work environment in chapter 6. And he's going to cover all the areas of life. And he begins with these verses to imitate or be followers of God. You see, there is a pattern that we all follow. The word living goes on the line there in that cloud. And then under the 2 figures, the man and the woman, write the word Christ. Christ is the pattern that we are given to understand how to live life in all of its dimensions. We're to live life like him. In 1 Peter 2:21 it says, For even hereunto were you called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Now that's pretty clear that he's the example. He's the exemplar. We're to live like him. Or 1 John 2, verse 6, it says, He that abides in him ought himself also so to walk, even as he walked. It looks at Christ's entire life, his walk, and we're to walk like him. So we're to look at his life, understand his life, see how he handles life, and we're to do it like him. He becomes our role model. And not only like him, but with him. He's our enabler, not just our exemplar. In Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's not just a nice verse in the Bible. That's a promise. I mean, that's something to hang on to and understand, that when we trust Christ in the dimensions of life, he enables us beyond our wildest dreams and helping us to handle things like the Chicago experience. So that's the pattern. And so this I've labeled masterful living. That is full of the master. Masterful living. And that's available to all of us. That's the encouraging part here. Ephesians 5 and 6. Ephesians 5:2 begins, be followers of God as dear children. You see the design there with God in the center of it right there? There's a line under it. Put the word mimic, M-I-M-I-C. Mimic. The Greek word here for imitate or be followers of God is the Greek word mimetes. That's where we get the word mimic. Or a mime. who mimics, other situations. To mimic God. So here's his first thing out of the box. He says, all right, you want to live a life that's really calm with regard to your attitude and life circumstances? Well, you got to mimic God. And right away I think, that's kind of nuts. John 1:18 says nobody has ever seen God at any time. So how in the world am I going to mimic God? Well, there's only one way. And that is to realize that God came to earth, lived among us in the person of Christ, and I'm being told to mimic Christ. That's what verse 2 says. It says, and walk in love as Christ has loved us. So, Christ becomes my pattern. I'm to mimic him. Now, the first question here for me and for you too is how well do you know Jesus? I mean, if you've got an idol out there somewhere that you're trying to, model your life after, the kids do that with all these, heroes they've got, and they want to be like so-and-so, I want to be like him, I want to be like her, and they get to know these people. Well, a lot of Christians, we are to be like Christ, and we don't know Christ very much at all. We know his name, kind of like his address in the Bible, and that's it, and what's he like? I mean, how does he deal with people? How does he handle that situation? And we're to do it like him. So that's the first injunction to us here, to mimic Christ. Verse 2 there, under that, there's a line, and the line says peripateo, to walk around. Put the word walk on that line. It says in verse 2 that we're to walk in love. Just like Christ. Okay? Walk. Peripateo is a Greek word. Pateo is the word for walk. Peri means around. It's a preposition that means around. We have it in the word perimeter, the meter that goes around the circle. Perimeter. This is peripateo, to walk around. It's a euphemism for how you live. You walk around. So that's living. And so way down the bottom, there's a line under that, and just put the word live there. We walk around, we live. Now, we're to mimic God and follow the arrow down to the figure there and put the words as Christ under that figure. The way we mimic God is to do it like Jesus did it. We're to mimic him. All right? Now, what did he do? Well, there's one word that encapsulates it all. You can take the entire life of Christ and you can wrap it in this bundle that's called love. Agape. That's the word agape here. Love. That's what goes on the line above giving. Love. Agape love is not the love of feeling. It's not the love of emotion. It's not what I like. It's the love of the mind. It's doing what is right because it's right by somebody. And it's always defined in terms of love. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. It's always defined in terms of giving. It's not a taking love, it's a giving love. And his entire life is encapsulated with that word, to love. Now you notice in verse 2, it says there are two ways that he shows that, as an offering and a sacrifice to God. Do you know the difference between an offering and a sacrifice? Well, chicken and the pig. A little dyslexic. The chicken and the pig are walking along, and they're talking about breakfast. And so the chicken says to the pig, well, let's go in and have breakfast. And the pig says, well, what do we have? And the chicken says, well, let's have bacon and eggs. And the pig looks at him and says, well, for you, that's just an offering. For me, it's a real sacrifice. You see, an offering is, to the right, you write the word gifts. It's what you give external to yourself. That's an offering. You give presents, you give gifts, you give, you're a humanitarian person and you help somebody else, you give something. But then sacrifice, the word there next to it is self. You give yourself. There's no higher gift you can give to anybody. But agape love is giving yourself. It's not just giving things, it's giving yourself. And so Christ was characterized by giving things, but also by giving himself to the point of death for us. That's how he would determine the meaning of agape love. Now, there's one last thing it says in verse 2. A sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. Right down on that bottom line there, sweet smell. Right across from live, it goes across, sweet smell. This phrase is taken from the first three sacrifices in Leviticus chapter 1, verse through 7, 1 through chapter 7. And there are 5 sacrifices, and the first 3 are called sweet-smelling savors, because these are things God really likes. And the word sweet savor is what it sounds like. I mean, it smells good to God. And you have to understand those sacrifices to understand why. But they smell good. And what it's saying here is that when Christ lived his life in a life of love by offerings and sacrifice, that it was very sweet smelling to God. A sweet life in God's sight. Do you realize that we leave an odor wherever we go? Yeah. You know, you're in a place and you act crazy and you upset people and whatever, and they say, "Ugh, glad they're gone." It was a putrid odor, an acrid odor, an acidic odor. But then you go in and you're helping people and you're friendly and you're very flexible and you're dealing with people in ways that help them and so forth. And I think, wow. Loved having them around. Can't wait till they're back. You're a sweet-smelling savor. I had a teacher in the 2nd grade. We always knew where she was, even if she came up behind us, because she wore a perfume that smelled like Jell-O. She was the Jell-O lady. We always knew where she was. And she left an odor wherever she went. She smelled like Jell-O. What do you smell like when you're with people? What do they say when you leave? Do they want you back? Or they're glad you're gone? So it's a sweet-smelling savor. When we mimic Christ and live a life of love by giving of ourselves, giving of our resources, and giving of our person, ourself, that's very sweet to people. You don't see that too often. They love it. So this is just how he starts, okay? Now, let me take you through this chapter kind of more quickly now as we go through all of this. And the next page is called The Spiritual Realm. And notice what he says, beginning in verse 3. Let me read verses 3 through 7. But, this is the adversative. This is contrastive to what we just saw. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be once named among you as becometh saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, nor unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no man deceive you with vain words, for because of these things comes the wrath of God upon the sons of disobedience. Be not you, therefore, partakers with them. Now, he lists out 6 characteristics, and they're all pretty bad. Fornication is the Greek word porneia, and that's where you get the whole gamut of sexual immorality, sexual impurity. Uncleanness is the word for clean with an alpha prefix, which negates it, so not clean, spiritually dirty. Covetousness, that's the 10th commandment, don't covet what your neighbor has, and that's greediness. Indecency is how you look, it's shameful appearance. Corrupt talk, literally it means rotten words, and that's what you say. So indecency and corrupt talk, how you look and what you say, that's pretty much life. And then the last one, it says jesting in the King James Version, but it really means mocking others. It's not that God doesn't have a sense of humor. The Proverbs say a merry heart does good like a medicine. So God, has given us a sense of humor. And that's not it at all. This is mocking other people, jesting, making fun of them, belittling them, putting them down. He says, don't do that. Now, he says in verse 8, you once were this. Apart from Christ, this is the world we live in. That stuff. And you live there. And there are two reasons, 2 bullet points there to the right, that it's really not a good thing to do. The first bullet point, it's incompatible with Christ. Incompatible with Christ. That's verse 5. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. It's incompatible with Christ. The second bullet point is verse 6. It's deserving of God's wrath. Verse 6, let no man deceive you with vain words, for because of these things comes the wrath of God upon the sons of disobedience. It's deserving of God's wrath. So there are 2 good reasons not to get involved in that kind of a lifestyle. It's incompatible with Christ, and it's deserving of God's wrath. And he comes to verse 8, which is the pivot verse. This is where this whole section here, revolves around this verse. It says, for you once were darkness. That's everything above it. Verses 3 to 7. That's darkness. And that's the way you used to live. That used to be your worldview. You lived in the world, and you thought like the world. And so you may not have done all those things. You may have done them as egregiously as others have done them. But that's the way you live. That's the way you think. That's just life. And it's darkness. He goes on to say in verse 8, but now are you children of light. There's been a change that has taken place with regard to you. Walk as children of light. You see, you once were darkness, but now you live in a totally different realm. You have a different worldview. It's the worldview of light. Now, this metaphor of darkness and light, that's a common biblical metaphor. And it talks about that which is evil and that which is righteous. God is light. In him is no darkness at all. 1 John 1 and verse 5. So darkness is the antithesis of God. It's everything contrary to God. No darkness in God. He is light. Light is that which pleases God. Light is that which is righteous. That is what is good. And there are a lot of verses that put this metaphor into a context. For instance, John 3:16, if you go on and read, and you get down to verse 19, and this is the condemnation that light is come into our world. And men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For everyone that does evil hates the light, neither comes to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that does truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. You see the contrast, living in darkness, living in light? There are 2 groups of people on the mountain. One is a group of escaped convicts, and they're hiding out. The other group are lost campers. Don't know where they're at. And the helicopter is now at night flying over with its big spotlight down onto the mountain, searching on the mountain. So what do the convicts do? They run from it because it's going to expose them. What do the lost campers do? They run to it. Here we are. Save us. It's how you respond to life. Do you have a worldview that's encapsulated with the word darkness or the word light? Are you walking in the light, which is the way that God would have us walk? Now, you notice in verse 8 he says, this is the pivot verse. You once were darkness, but now there's been a change. That change is in Colossians 1, verses 12 to 14, giving thanks unto the Father who has made us fit to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light, who has delivered us from the power of darkness and has translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son. When you become a Christian and you become a child of God, you are now in the realm of light. Other than that, you're in the realm of darkness. This world and its entire system, encompasses you. So he says, you once were darkness, but now are you light. And what's the last exhortation there? Walk as children of light. Remember that word peripateo? Walk around is the euphemism for life. Walk. Live your life. Walk as children of light. Live consistent with who you are. So many Christians live inconsistently. They claim Christ, but they walk in darkness. And it's a crazy circumstance. He said, if you're a Christian, hey, for Christ's sake, live consistent with who you are. And now we go on, and he begins to describe light. Prior to this, he talked about darkness, verses 3 to 7. Now, verses 9 to 13, he's talking about light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth. Now, this is not the fruit of the Spirit, goodness, righteousness, and truth. You get the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, where it says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, self-control. There are 9 things that are descriptive of the fruit of what the Spirit of God produces in our life. But that fruit has 3 characteristics. Number 1, it's good. In the eyes of God, it's good. Number 2, it's right. It's righteousness. It's right. It's the right thing to do. And number 3, it's truth. It's the truth. It's not living life as a lie. It's living life as God intended. It's the truth. So that's what it's saying in verse 9. The fruit of the Spirit. That's the way he wants us to live. Verse 10, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord. Remember up earlier there, we said one of the bullet points for the living in darkness is it's incompatible with Christ. And now we're down here to living in light. He says, now that's acceptable with God. You see this thing he's building here between the two. It's acceptable with God. And then he says in verses 11 and following, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret, but all things that are reproved are made manifest by the light, for whatever does make manifest is light. There are 2 imperatives. You know what an imperative is? That's a command, or at least it's a serious statement. It's not think about it, it's hey, do this, okay? And there are 2 things. Number 1 is don't have no fellowship. This is the company you keep. No fellowship. Now, it doesn't say no contact. In our evangelistic concern for other people that they would come to know the message of Christ, we have to have contact with the unbelieving world. We never just step out of life into some, super ethereal realm, where none of this goes on. I mean, we live in this cesspool just like everybody else. And we have contact with people. You may even build friendships with people. But the point is, you don't do what they do. You don't think like they think. There's no fellowship, commonality. See, that's the point. Don't have fellowship. Sometimes friends are the ones that pull us away. Especially, with regard to the kids, and teenagers and so forth. That can be one of the most difficult things, when friends pull them away. But it can happen to anybody when you get caught up with wrong friends. So that's the first command. And the second command, it says, but reprove them. That's in verse 11. That is, bring it to light. Expose what they do. Now, does that mean you go around with your finger, stuck on somebody's nose and pointing them out? No, not at all. Jesus never did that. How did Jesus expose the fakes? He just showed up. It's the life he lived that was so good, so righteous, so true, that in contrast, it put them to shame. And it was a reproof to them. But all things that are reproved are made manifest by what? By the light. You take a dark room and you just insert a little candle. And it's amazing how the room brightens up. Light always dispels darkness. Darkness cannot dispel light. And you just insert light. I've often said, as a pastor for many years, I have ruined more fun just by showing up. Pastors here, and they're all a little tense, whatever, and I leave, and then everybody takes, lets the breath out. Okay, now we can do what we can do. Okay? It's just being what you need to be. If you're walking a righteous life that is good before God, you're going to be a reproof to an ungodly society. Not by not saying a thing. Now, if necessary, use words. But it's basically your lifestyle. If you're living consistent with who you are. Now, you see this whole page here? It's a spiritual dynamic filled with tension, darkness and light. And we live in the midst of that crucible of tension. So, what do you need to do at this point? Next page. You need to wake up to what's really going on. Verse 14, wherefore, he says, awake, you that sleep, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light. That verse kind of mystified me for a long time. Arise from the dead? What's he talking about? Gonna have a resurrection here? Basically, he's saying, hey, wake up. Then I got to thinking, you know what? You see a person who's asleep, soundly asleep, and you see a person who's dead in the casket, they look just the same. I've seen people who are so asleep, they're breathing so shallow, you want to go over and just kind of shake them, make sure they're still with you. Okay? I've seen people in the casket, and they've done such a good job, they look very much alive, just asleep. And there's no difference between the one who's dead and the one who's asleep. It's just like Christians. We can have life, but be totally asleep to what's going on. No awareness, no conscious understanding of what's really going on. We're living life like a dead person. We don't see the working of God. We don't see the Spirit of God. We don't see the darkness-light conflict. We don't see any of that because we're oblivious. We're off in our head somewhere. We're in a dream world, and we're just living like dead people. And so many Christians, you couldn't tell the difference between them and an unsaved person looking at their lifestyle. And that's a shame, because they're just insensitive to what's going on. My son wrestled when he was in college, in high school. And in his high school time, he had a practice on a Saturday. And he had set his alarm for getting up early so he could go into practice. And I heard the alarm go off, run its cycle, and no movement in the room. So I thought, uh-oh, he's sleeping through, and I don't want him to be late for practice. He'll get in trouble. So I went over, and I kind of knocked on his door, no answer. I opened it up. Hey, Rob. No answer. I get over by the bed, and I think, Rob, you need to wake up. Nothing. He's just really zoned out. So I reach down and I start to shake him a little bit, and he's still not waking up. So I kind of get him by both lapels, and I'm bouncing him on the bed, and, hey Rob, wake up. And suddenly his eyes open. He says, hey, Dad, what's happening? I says, hey, it's Saturday morning, your alarm went off, you got wrestling practice, you better get up. Oh, man. He jumps out of bed, he throws his clothes on, runs out, jumps in the car, takes off, in a cloud of dust, and he's off. Because he woke up and realized what was really going on. And I think the Apostle Paul at this point has his hands on our lapel, shaking us. Hey, wake up! Wake up! Don't be like a dead person. Wake up. And Christ will give you light. Have you ever walked in a dark room that you didn't know where things were? And you couldn't find the light switch? And you're tripping over this and bumping into that, until you get the switch, and all of a sudden, now everything seems clear. And what it says is, if you wake up to what's really going on, and what Christ's true purposes are in our world, filled with tension, all the rottenness of our world, and we live in the midst of it, you realize what's really going on, Christ will turn the light on for you. And you won't be bumping your head against the cabinet anymore. You won't be tripping over the hassock on the floor anymore. You'll be walking in a way that's consistent with knowing what's going on. So this verse is really important. Wake up. All right, then what? Well, verses 15 and 16. 15, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. Circumspectly simply means carefully. Walk carefully. That's what goes on that line there. Then, walk carefully. That's what you do. Those are your priorities. So, you wake up, to what's really going on. You pray and you say to the Lord, okay, Lord, show me what's really important for me to do. Help me to get my life focused. I don't want to be doing the peripheral stuff now. I want to be doing the essential stuff. And it's like Stephen Covey's book, First Things First, you know. Keep the main thing. And now you're focusing what really matters. So much of life just doesn't matter. What matters? And you're getting your priorities straight. The next thing is in verse 16, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Redeeming the time. The word for time is not the word chronos, where you get the word chronology, sequence of time. This is the Greek word kairos, which means opportunity, times of opportunity. And so this is redeeming or buying up the opportunities. And so you redeem the time. That's when you do it. And on the right, that's the word for schedule. So you determine first what's important to do, and then you look at your schedule, and you have so much negotiable time. You got to go to work, you got to punch in here and there, but you got negotiable time. And okay, when am I going to do this? And the classic illustration of this is having time with the Lord each day. We might call it a devotional time, or whatever you call it, but having a time with the Lord each day. When are you going to do that? My life is really busy. I get up in the morning, I fly all day long, I'm tired at night, and I flop in bed. When am I going to do this? Well, I really need to get up a little earlier so I can do it before I go to work. Well, schedule-wise, I've been going to bed too late. I kind of stay up and watch, Letterman, whatever. Maybe that's not as important as I thought it was. Maybe I need to get to bed earlier. So I have to get to bed earlier so I can get up earlier. My schedule is now flopping, reflecting priority rather than simply being what I fall into as a matter of course. So you redeem the time. You focus on the time with the Lord. You say, okay, Lord, how do I put my schedule in the light of my priorities to do what is most important to do? And what's the result of that? Verses 17 and 18. Wherefore, don't be unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. You realize there are only two possibilities in life. You can understand the will of God for you, or you can be unwise. That's it. You're in one or two of those categories. Well, how do you know the will of the Lord? I mean, that question is asked a lot. How do you know the will of the Lord? Well, it's really not all that difficult. Let me tell you how it happens. First of all, you wake up to what's really going on, so you know what's happening in the spiritual realm, which is the eternal realm, the thing that's really going to matter. And then you get your priorities right. You walk carefully, like a cat walking on a picket fence with a barking dog on either side. You're really careful where you're putting your paws now, and you're walking carefully, and then you take your schedule and you put it in light of your priorities so that you're doing what you need to do in the time that you have available to do it, and then you run out of time, so everything else is not the will of the Lord. What you discover is the will of the Lord for any given day. It's a process. It's simple. Well, I like Monday Night Football. But in this time zone, it really goes late. And I get up early. So, I want to watch the game, and so, but it's going to go on until close to midnight. If I don't get to bed by 10, I'm useless in the morning. So, my flesh is going to tell me, just stay up. And I need something beyond myself that's going to empower me to do what I'm not inclined to do. That's why verse 18 is there. Don't be drunk with wine, in which is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. Amen. See, wine will give you, a certain capacity to do things you would not otherwise do. It has a controlling influence upon you. That's not the way it works. Being filled with the Spirit, you say it takes the Spirit of God to do the will of God. Amen. So I had to determine, and this is what I do, honest. I watch the first half, and then I go on the internet the next day to see who won. I had to make that choice. if life was going to make any sense to me. I couldn't just fall into patterns. I had to think about it, and I had to pray and say, Spirit of God, give me the want to as well as the ability to do what you want me to do. So, know the will of God, but realize it takes the power of God to do the will of God. Next page, priorities and schedule. All I got to do is just summarize this. Because I'm really living in a life of tension right now because I got to buy you all lunch if I don't get you out. Okay? So, you got your priorities and schedule. Christ is our exemplar and our enabler. We're going to do the will of God and the power of God. And so what's the... Now, remember, Paul is very logical, very sequential. What's the next verses? Well, verses 19, 20, and 21 are all personal reactions to life. Number 1, singing, making melody in your heart. That's the words, melody in your heart. Singing, making melody in your heart. Psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing, making melody in your heart. That's a joyful response to life. The next is giving thanks. Giving thanks for all things unto the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. I have a thankful spirit now. I'm not angry. I'm not judgmental. I'm thankful for what God's doing in my life. And then last one is submitting to others. 21 says, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. And that's love. It's joy, then it's peace, then it's love. These are the first fruits of the Spirit. And if you're filled with the Spirit, what's it going to do? It's going to put a melody in your heart. It's going to give you a thankful spirit. And it's going to make you willing to submit to others, that is, to help them. It's all very personal. It has to start with the personal, you see. Because you can't be a good marriage partner unless you got the personal things settled. Because you bring you into every other relationship you sustain. That's the bad part. Number 2, verses 22 to 33 is all about marriage. And that's the next priority in God's schedule. Number 1, you and your walk with the Lord. Number 2, if you're married, your spousal relationship. And you need to understand how the wife and husband get along, and that's what this whole passage is about. The man who married, wanted an ideal, and he married an ordeal. Now he wants a new deal. That kind of deal is out the window. And you say, marriage is something very important to God. Some have said that marriage is like a midnight phone call. First you get a ring, and then you wake up. So understanding marriage from God's perspective. Do you realize what's going on in our society with regard to marriage? A whole redefining of what God said marriage is. The forces of darkness are really working hard to undermine what God has done with regard to marriage. Got to understand that in the spiritual conflict. And the third area is family, chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. Now, don't let chapter divisions fool you. This is a whole string of pearls on a necklace, one after the other. And the next thing is family. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. And the whole child-parent thing, the whole gay agenda is redefining marriage and the family. The whole feminist movement now, National Organization of Women, have come out and said it's not about the fair treatment of women. It's about ascendancy and feministic control. I mean, the whole thing has just gone crazy against the family. And the last is verses 5 to 9 of chapter 6. It's about servants and masters, but in our terminology, it's employers and employees. And really, it's any area in which authority is an issue, whether it's government, or school, or work, or institutions, or law enforcement. You have employee on the left, submission to authority, and employer on the right, which is the exercise of authority. And we are given incredible information in those 5 verses there on how we either exercise authority or how we respond to authority. And you see what he's done? He's put all of life into this perspective that he's outlined for us in the first verses through verse 18. And then the last part of chapter 6 is the spiritual conflict. We're right back to where we were in verses 3 to 7. And here's where he tells us to put on the whole armor of God to stand against the wiles of the devil. The devil's at work in our society today. things that are going on that are so troubling with regard to our country as well as all our personal lives and what is affecting us and how we're responding. And people are angry. They watch the news and get angry. Well, if you understand this, you can watch the news, pop the popcorn, and have a good night's sleep. Because you're putting it into context. So here is living in the tension of reality. One of the greatest passages I know in the Word of God for living a calm life. Christian attitude and life management. So this fits right into your class here. And it's helped me immensely to understand this and to put it into practice. I hope it'll do the same for you.
Hi, Dwight Bain here, and I want to tell you about calmclass.com. The website that you came to is actually a teaching lesson that we record in Orlando, Florida, every single week. You can actually come be part of the live audience. If you're in Florida, maybe you're visiting the Orlando area, come check us out. We meet at 3000 South John Young Parkway. It's on the campus of First Baptist Orlando, which is actually a pretty large place. So what you're looking for is a large building by a lake. It's a big 3-story building called Faith Hall. And we're in Faith Hall, upstairs in room 301. But if you don't get a chance to come live to the presentation in Orlando, then if these lessons about making your life work better, to get past frustration in relationships, maybe frustrations on the job, maybe you're just kind of feeling beat up about what you believe. If you enjoy these lessons, would you do me a favor? Would you tell a friend? Because by your experience of telling other people, hey, this website helped me, these lessons helped me, when you're doing that, you're helping take the message that we teach in Orlando and to be able to spread that to the entire world. And thanks.